Welcome to the Staffing Playbook Podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the dynamic world of staffing and HR. I'm your host, Stephen Farrell. Join me each week as we dive deep into the strategies, insights, and stories that shape the staffing industry. From the latest trends to expert interviews and practical tips, we'll equip you with the right tools and knowledge to succeed in the staffing industry. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, the Staffing Playbook is here to help you play your best game. Let's get started.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Staffing Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Farrell. Today's topic is about accountability. Let's talk about accountability. I am joined by no other than the Ian McLeod from Grow Up Leadership. Welcome, Ian.
What's up, man? I love the intro music has changed. It gets me hype, gets me pumped.
Gets you a little jazzed, right?
Mark Webb said, "Let's go."
Let's go
on LinkedIn.
So before we get into the topic, Monday is Labor Day. And most people celebrate Labor Day by taking the day off, right? That's a common practice.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people aren't able to do that. So we will be thinking about you during our barbecues as you're hard at work. I'm actually going to celebrate Labor Day in a different way. I'm actually celebrating it this afternoon with my son. He's 9 years old, and I'm going to be bringing him to my office, and we are going to be doing cold calls. I've got this list right here of leads that have never been called on, and we are going to call them together.
I saw you post to share on LinkedIn about how he had expressed some interest and you had him do this. And then he actually got a call back or something, or basically was extended to make a sale.
Story. I'll keep it real short. Last weekend, my son wanted $30, and I'm like, earn it. He's like, what can I do? I'm like, well, all your chores are done, so there's really nothing you can do. And he's like, just tell me, Dad. I'm like, well, you can learn how to sell and call some leads for me, and if you get a tangible lead that turns into an account, I'll pay you $30 and then some.
That's awesome.
And so like I thought that would be over and we'd just move on and he'd go play his Xbox. But no, he's like, okay, Dad, teach me. So I showed him how to look up job ads on Indeed and then go to their company profile, go to their website, get a contact phone number. And then I gave him a script, like just a simple script. Hey, my name's Robert. I'm 9 years old. I saw you had a job posted online. I'm helping my dad. He has a staffing company. Would you be willing to talk to him about your open positions? And so we're kind of practicing and role playing, and then he does go and play his Xbox. Well, Monday morning I'm at work. It's 8:30 in the morning, and I get a call from him. I'm in a meeting, so I reject it. He calls again. I reject it. He calls again. I pick it up. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, Dad, I got our first customer. So he called some company out of Chicago. And they just thought it was hilarious and cute. And, so I talked to them. I ended up not being able to help them, but it was really cute. But he is dead set on learning the craft and earning some income. And so, hey, I'm going to embrace it and help him and teach him and see what he does with it.
It's a great skill set to develop, man. And talk about responsibility rolling into accountability there with your son, man. I hats off to you for fostering this kind of dedication to learning at this age, man. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, my son, he goes through these phases like all kids. So, I'm taking the approach that this might just be a phase, and he'll learn some cool things. He'll learn how to communicate, get out of his comfort zone. But part of me goes, man, I hope he just like runs with this for like a couple years, has developed some real skill sets.
It's a good strategy to get in there, that a different way to get around when you're hey, I'm 9 years old and I'm doing this to help my dad out or whatever. That's
No, it goes to show selling is not about techniques and very carefully crafted responses. It's relationship building.
Right.
It's that human connection. And if a 9-year-old can connect with a multi-million-dollar company, well, so can you. You just need to learn how to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So good topic today. Everybody, in any position of leadership, frontline employees, top of the organization to the bottom, everybody has a piece when it comes to accountability. Everybody has their own responsibilities and they're accountable to them. And so this is going to be a jam-packed session with Ian here, because we both have a lot of experience of learning what not to do versus what works. And so I want to start off with just let's talk just real briefly, high level definition of accountability.
Yes.
And the importance of accountability. And also I want to talk a little bit about the contrasts of accountability to finger pointing. So simple definition, Ian: accountability in the workplace is taking ownership of one's actions and responsibilities. Sounds about right.
Makes sense. I would add too, I think, and it's called out in there, but I think it's helpful to distinguish responsibility from accountability. And the way I think of it is responsibility is more the tasks and the action that you take or that you're responsible for, and accountability is more about the outcomes.
I'll give you a really short story that a mentor of mine shared. His dad asked him to cut the grass one day when he was probably 9 or 10, like my son's age. And so he goes to cut the grass and the lawnmower is out of gasoline. Goes to the garage, the canister's empty. So he goes, well, that was my responsibility, but I can't do it because there's no gas. And he went on about his day. His dad came home and noticed the grass wasn't cut. And he was like, son, what happened? And he's like, there was no gas. He says, but that's your responsibility. You are accountable to cut the grass every weekend. And he says, well, there was no gasoline. He says, okay, did you ask a neighbor? Did you ask your mom for a ride to the gas station? Right. Like, you are accountable to getting this done every weekend. And you decided because you didn't have gas, you couldn't do it.
Right.
And so that is responsibility versus accountability. He was responsible to cut the grass, but he's also accountable to getting it done.
To deliver on that. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. There's a lot of finger pointing when it comes to accountability in the workplace.
Yes.
Where the blame is shifted to others to avoid the responsibility. The shifted the blame. There was no gas. That was not my problem. That's Dad's problem. Versus I was accountable to get this done. So there's a lot of finger pointing in the workplace. I think all of us are guilty of it from time to time, sometimes more than we'd like to admit. There's a couple stories I want to share today as we discuss this topic, because, man, I've had some pretty bad examples of not being accountable.
It's how we learn sometimes, man. It's how we learn.
So, Ian, one thing that the audience always talks about when it comes to you on this program is you really understand the psychology.
Yeah.
Better than I can ever explain. And so, let's talk about the psychological roots of accountability and that finger pointing. There's one quote that comes to mind from Marshall Goldsmith. When we blame others, we give up our power to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think there actually is some various research that's gone on specific to accountability, but and kind of jumping back to your point about finger pointing. I mean, I think just starting there, what nearly everyone is looking for when they're talking about accountability, or and probably if they're listening to this, or when they've reached out to me for consulting, or just when they're usually pointing it out, they're usually talking about somebody else, right? They're not talking about themselves, my own accountability. It's that this person is not being, some other person is the problem, right?
Yep.
And I think that's really the issue, and so they're wanting to know, how do you get this other person to be accountable? everyone is so busy pointing fingers at everyone. No one asks, how to be more accountable. How do I develop accountability in myself? And I think that's really the problem. Certainly, again, when people reach out to me from a consulting or information standpoint, it's how do I get someone to do this thing I want them to do? And that's, again, all directions. Managers point at their employees to be more accountable. Employees want their managers to be more accountable for the culture and the environment. Executives point every different direction. Everyone but themselves, generally, and I think that's when you're talking, especially about like leadership. That's what really makes a strong leader, is to be accountable. The reality is, especially in a leadership position, and the higher up you go, the more you're accountable for. The reality is those executives are accountable for every layer below them. And the reality is really everyone is accountable for their own success. And there's a great book I'll get into in just a second, but yet kind of go into the something psychologists identify, that I think is from a cognitive standpoint is the main reason we see, accountability concerns. So have you heard of the term, and it's kind of an older term, cognitive dissonance?
I have. That's not a term that's often thrown around these days.
Yeah. So, and it's a term in psychology where your behavior and your actions are inconsistent with your beliefs and values. So, we have this contradictory beliefs, which actually causes discomfort, right? Like we really cannot live with that. It's very difficult. So people tend to then legitimize or rationalize their decisions. This was actually first developed by Leon Festinger back in 1950s, and then further tested by another famous psychologist named Elliot Aronson. So a lot of testing, gone on, a lot of theories have come out from cognitive dissonance. Essentially, sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean I did mean to interrupt, because I remember you telling me a story a couple of weeks ago about, I think you and I were having this conversation. It might have been somebody else, but it's like when someone is speeding, they're a jerk. They're not conscious of safety. They should go to jail. But when you speed, you have a reason, and it's completely validated. Is that kind of a similar situation in what you're expressing?
It's similar. There's a different term for that, but they all kind of, certainly in the brain, it all kind of ties together. Cognitive dissonance is a little bit different, and you can it gets applied to a lot of different theories and concepts. And essentially, again, there's discomfort when your actions are one thing and your beliefs are another, and they conflict or they're inconsistent. And so you have this discomfort. So then you again have to kind of justify the kind of example that Elliot Aronson gives. If you can imagine, there's like a triangle, person standing on the triangle, right? They have, the one he talks about is there's a decision of the student whether or not to cheat on a test, right? If you decide to cheat, then you're going to you'll slide down either one side of this kind of triangle, and this is where you end up, and this is where you will basically justify going forward. This is how you're going to think, right? And it goes either way, right? So if you decide to cheat, you're going to justify it in some way. Well, this test wasn't really a big deal, and I cheated so that I could get into, pass this class, so I can get into this college,
right,
so I can become a doctor and help people, right, and save the world. So they come to some justification. If I decide not to cheat, it's because I'm a good person and cheating's wrong. And even though I, sacrificed this possibility of me becoming a doctor or whatever, I have justified my actions based on the fact that I'm a good person. So it's kind of, once you go that direction, then you justify it. And I think really that's what's happening, is that, so when I don't do this thing, right, if I don't do whatever I'm supposed to do, or if I don't if I don't go get the gasoline, I'm going to justify my actions instead of having this conflicting. And again, it's a psychological thing. Your brain just can't handle the fact that you have these two conflicting ideas.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So, I'm starting to think about this finger pointing again. And, if you're a leader and your boss comes to you and says, hey, why haven't you hit these goals? Or why wasn't this completed? And, you start finger pointing, well, it was this person on my team, or this person didn't do this, or, there's these other conditions that were not controllable and it's not my fault. And I think there's a real problem there, because if you're blaming your team or an individual on your team, that's going to erode trust, right? Not just with that individual, but with your boss. If your boss understands the accountability piece and they see you finger pointing at a problem or a person, that's going to erode the trust between you and your boss, because all of a sudden they recognize that you are not holding yourself accountable to the commitments that you promised, right? And if you continue to point towards your team, it just creates this toxic work environment, and that goes with colleagues too. If we're finger pointing at each other, it just erodes that culture very quickly.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you're talking about that trust, and that. So we, when providing some leadership training, one of the things that me and various colleagues have talked about is leveling up your conversations. Even so, you might have the initial conversation about the initial behavior that's an issue, right? But if this person doesn't improve, at some point you can't keep talking about them not turning in this report or late or whatever, or whatever they're doing, or interrupting in a meeting or whatever it is, this issue that they're doing. You then need to level up your conversation. So your conversation, when you are meeting with them again, is more about on the terms of trust, and that I've talked to you multiple times about this. This is still becoming an issue. I no longer trust that you're going to be able to deliver
Right.
on this, and it's a different conversation then at that point. And I think it's important for leaders, when they are having feedback conversations, to make sure that they are changing their conversation depending on what really is the issue. And trust, I wouldn't put that in the first or second conversation, but if you're continually talking to somebody about their performance and they're not improving, that's when you start bringing in terms like trust and
Yeah, it's like, if you're leading a team, your team has individual responsibilities to the commitments that they've committed to make, right? And
Mhm.
as a leader of that team, you're accountable to their commitments getting done, right? And when a team member is falling behind or failing, you're still accountable to that overall commitment of what you've been asked to do as a department leader or a company leader.
Right.
And so, yes, the problem might be that individual not getting their work done, or maybe they're not cut out for their role. But your job, you have to hold yourself accountable. We still have to hit this goal or complete this task. And so, you work with that individual and get them back on track. That's probably the first step. And if that doesn't work, it's okay. The next step is I have to find someone else that can step in and get that done. And there's some other scenarios, but at the end of the day, you're still accountable to the commitments you've made, and your team has individual responsibilities, and you're accountable to ensuring everyone's successful.
Yeah, I mean, that's your role as a leader. I think one of the things I see pretty consistently when someone is having concerns, or there's a lack of accountability or issues with accountability, uh, the common thing that I see is that though those workplaces lack systems in place to create accountability. So some sort of performance
Mm,
management system where you're making sure you're creating clear expectations, making sure first that the people know the behaviors, your staff know the behaviors they need to demonstrate, and they have the resources to accomplish whatever. So that training and those kind of resources that are given at first. Then making sure to set those clear expectations, having a transparent evaluation process, routinely delivering feedback, and then if someone's not performing, then holding them accountable. And I think oftentimes one of the biggest things that I see when people are saying, well, this person isn't being accountable to their responsibilities, that there's no system in place to make sure that they understand, do they really know what's expected of them? did you just give them a training 3 months ago and and
Right.
that's it, right? But you never said, this is what I'm expecting out of you. This is how I'm going to evaluate you.
This is how
Here's
I'm
how
gonna
you
support you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
tell them, look, this is where we need you to be. This is where you're performing at. What are the steps we need to do to get you to be up here? And I think that oftentimes, unfortunately, is missing. And it's work, right? I mean, it's work it's a lot of work for management sometimes to put those things into place. But it's so valuable in creating a structure for people to understand what's expected, and then for you to also, as a manager, to hold them accountable to those things.
That's right. And you make a good point. You have to have that structure of accountability. You have to have the systems in place. And not only does that hold that individual accountable to those expectations, but it also holds the leader accountable, right? To ensure those expectations are being met. And if those are not clearly defined, you have no one to blame but yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a and I know Cassandra got an awesome comment in here. I don't know if you saw that one.
It's up on the
But
screen.
yeah, talking about unforeseen, basically cheating might offer a shortcut, but it often leads to unforeseen consequences down the road. And I think, that's a great point. I mean, you have to to make sure that people know the kind of long-term impact of not being responsible. Um, but
I do want to say one more thing on the finger pointing
yeah,
as I point my finger at the screen. This is something a lot of new managers run into, and it's a common mistake. I have made it more times than I want to admit, and that is, let's just say you have someone that you need to write up. Okay, they broke a policy, they didn't do what they said they did, they pencil whipped something. Like, there's a clear reason you've got to write them up, or maybe even let them go. And I remember young in my retail career, I had to let someone go because they were just not, it's called pencil whipping. They were doing an inventory and they're supposed to check that all the equipment's there in the stock room, but they had other tasks to do. So they just checked off that all the equipment was there. Well, the next day I was doing an audit, checking the work, and lo and behold, we're missing 2 gaming systems. And so I go back to this person that did the audit, and or I should say, I first looked at the cameras and I see this individual just checking him off. And so I call my HR and talk to them. They're like, "Yeah, that's a terminable offense. There's nothing you can do." And so I go to this individual and I go, "Hey, I caught you on camera pencil whipping the inventory. Corporate said I have to let you go. I wish you're a great person. I really want you to stay, but I can't do anything about it. It's just what HR said." And so I wasn't holding myself accountable. Instead, I should have been, "Hey, this is my decision. You broke the policy. I want to understand why. Help me understand. I want to be empathetic. But at the end of the day, this was my decision, and I'm going to have to let you go." And a lot of young leaders don't. They point the finger up the chain. My boss said I have to write you up.
Yep.
HR said I had to let you go versus this is my decision.
I've done that. I've been guilty of that as well. And there, I mean, legitimately have been some times where I'm like, I don't really agree with this, this corrective action or this termination or what have you, and felt pressured to move forward. But irregardless, as a leader, you're part of this team, and you have to demonstrate that consistency. And so it does no good to sit there and shift blame to somebody else.
Yeah, it's like when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I don't really like this new program or policy." You could either go, "Yeah, I don't like it either. That's a corporate thing. They just are so disconnected." Or you can go, "Well, let's find out, maybe let's call the buyer who set this program up and get their input on why we have this new program, right? And how it's going to help us sell this product." Or, "Hey, let's just embrace it. People above our pay grade obviously, took an educated approach to this and rolled it out corporate wide. Let's run with it. Let's give our best and see what the outcome is. And so now everyone's taking personal responsibility to the task versus like, oh yeah, you're right, Ian, that's just a stupid corporate decision, just another corporate decision. There's no accountability there.
Right. And I think, again, kind of jumping back, that understanding, especially if you are in a leadership role, that you are accountable for your team. Now, obviously you can't control what they do, and you need to focus on what you can control and help them understand what they can control. But you're responsible for the performance of your team. That's your role. And again, it goes all the way up to the C-suite level executives. CEOs are responsible. If someone at the front line is not performing, regardless of how things are playing out, that leader at the top is responsible for the lack of the performance, as far as then holding each layer accountable to make sure that the resources are in place, the understanding of what's expected, whatever is needed to make sure these people are successful. And if they're not, then you as a leader, no matter how high you go up, are responsible. And I think, unfortunately, that when you have that kind of culture where people are pointing blame at, it's the middle management's fault, it's the director's fault, it's whoever, the supervisor didn't do what they're supposed to do, then you're just gonna create this culture where no one's gonna be accountable for anything. There's a book that I think I shared with you. It's an older book called The Oz Principle.
Is that from the Wizard of Oz?
So referring to the Wizard of Oz definitely is kind of the concept. And it's basically the idea. So it was written like in 1994. So it's like 30 years old, but been republished, and it's, a well-known kind of leadership book. This group, these guys, their second book, their follow-up book, is called Change the Culture, Change the Game. And it does go more into depth about how do you actually create this kind of culture that you want to see to really change, make the changes that you want to happen. But in the Oz Principle, what they're talking about is they kind of the authors refer to this kind of, line, this important line that you need to determine. And oftentimes people are, if they're working below the line, they're placing blame, they're pointing fingers again on other people or other reasons for their shortcomings or whatever it may be, right? Performing above the line is where you want to get everyone to be and where you want to encourage people. And it starts at a high up leadership level, is basically taking ownership, taking accountability, and saying, this is I'm part of this. I'm contributing to these problems. And again, Oz Principle, going along with the Wizard of Oz, the kind of the main kind of moral or thing they all kind of find out in the end was that it was all within them, right? It was all within their control. That the Tin Man did have a heart, after all. He was demonstrating that. The Cowardly Lion showed bravery, and so they all had the potential to achieve whatever they want to be. And so that's kind of what this. So if you're looking for a book about accountability, great book, Oz Principle by Connors, Smith, and Hickman.
I love that. It reminds me of what John C. Maxwell said. I remember this it's just always stuck for years, is the speed of the leader is the speed of the team, right? And it's that back to that accountability piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the leader sets the pace. And if you have that kind of culture where the leaders at the top are placing blame on somebody else, whether, hey, I got to put you on corrective action, I don't believe in this, or I got to terminate you, HR is making me do this kind of thing. That's not taking accountability of the work that you're doing and the larger goals that we're setting. And again, it's just going to breed this kind of culture where then nobody's going to be, if my leaders aren't going to be responsible,
Right.
Why would I, as a frontline employee, feel empowered to, or it's
Exactly.
important to
You don't.
be accountable?
Yeah. Um, maybe maybe we could talk a little bit about building personal accountability.
Yes.
Um, I think anyone listening to this podcast, maybe spend some time with just reflecting on, instances when you've taken personal accountability. Stephen Covey says it best: accountability breeds responsibility. Um, and so, what are ways, Ian, in your experience, that people can start building their own personal accountability at whatever level of leadership that they're in, or a frontline employee?
Yeah, I think it starts with understanding what what you can control is that's all you can control, right?
Yeah.
You can't control what other people are doing. You can't always control the conditions of the weather and the environment and all these different things, but you can control how you show up, what decisions you make, and the results you want to see, and how you contribute to that. A I probably She won't ever listen to this, so it won't matter. But I would embarrass my daughter. I got an example here. I was just talking to her literally just this morning about this. Just back to school. Last week, she got her school ID, and her picture was basically, she wasn't smiling. The person taking the pictures was just kind of an older lady who was just going through the process and then just pushing buttons, and who knows exactly what happened. She didn't get a chance to prepare and smile, so she's got this weird kind of smirk on her face. And
That'll make a good class picture.
right, so she's not excited about it. Luckily, it's just for her ID. So she doesn't have to show it too often, but she's still embarrassed by it. And I was saying, lesson learned. Anytime you're going to take your ID, just get that smile going, and yeah, I'm ready whenever you are, and just get yourself ready the whole time, and just anytime
Mm,
you're moving in front of it, that's a lesson learned. And she was like, well, no, it's their fault. They should have told me. And I'm like, okay, but can you control that? You can't. What's the outcome you want to achieve? You want to have a good looking picture. Do everything you can to make sure that happens, instead of worrying about, well, if it's somebody else's fault, then they own all the power. And then at the end of the day, you know everything that happens in the world is going to be somebody else's fault, and you basically can't control anything, and you're just going to be floating around in the wind having problems left and right. So
yeah, no, it's you can't control the weather, you can't control, the market conditions, but you can control how you respond to that, and also the lessons learned of how to maybe prepare for the unknown, the uncontrollable, so it doesn't have the same impact on you as it did the first time,
right.
right? Some of the biggest businesses that we know today, that the most successful ones, were the ones that came out of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009.
Right.
Because they may have learned the lessons with the dot-com boom, or the 2000 recession, and others were riding on the coattails of a really good season and profitability, and just didn't prepare for the worst case scenario, and they went under, right? And they're going to blame the financial crisis. It wasn't their fault, but really they have to take some responsibility and hold themselves accountable. Regardless of the uncontrollables, there are things we can control, and one of those is how we respond to the current crisis and how we prepare for a future crisis.
Yeah, it's all learning opportunities, and that's what if you can, again, learn from the mistakes, whether it be your own or someone else's, then you're going to improve your chances of being more successful going forward. And that's really, at the end of the day, people do make mistakes, but it's owning those mistakes, and owning the fact that you can learn from them. And again, I think even from the psychological standpoint, if you can get over your ego and say, you know what, this is actually a great way I can learn, um, I can improve, and that be your kind of way to get past this discomfort of having these two different values. Oftentimes, again, the value you have in your brain is, I'm a good employee, I work hard, how dare they hold me accountable? It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. You've then just justified, your lack of action or your lack of accountability.
Yeah.
Something too I missed, and I wanted to point it out because Cassandra made a great point here when she was talking about. I love this, especially when she's talking about free will is a powerful gift, and and I think this is kind of the thing that people oftentimes want to exert autonomy. And I think we've even talked about this with someone in previous conversations. So there is this really powerful drive to be autonomous, and so it's important, but at the same time, she says also it empowers us to choose our path, but it also demands responsibility. So
Mm.
every choice carries weight, and helping people understand that yes, we want you to be autonomous and be able to make your own decisions, but understand that the decisions you're making actually do impact other people around you, or your goals, or your long-term goals, that kind of stuff too. So as a leader, just helping people understand, instead, and helping them focus on what they can control and the impact or consequences that their actions have, in comparison to, let's just get bogged down in all the other problems that I have no control over and it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah. I want to share a good best practice, a technique for those that are interested in building personal accountability.
Yeah.
One of those is journaling. Take time every day to reflect on the day, what went well, what didn't go so well, what was in your control, what wasn't in your control, and just jot a few notes of how that made you feel. What could you have done differently? What would you like to do in the future? And then another tool is actually seeking feedback from your peers, right? And if people report to you, seek feedback from them, seek feedback from your boss. Those are just really simple conversations that you can have that, when I've had them, they've made a lasting impact. One time I'll share a quick story. I had someone, this was one of those accountability pieces that slapped me in the face, right? I had a lot of people reporting to me, lots of challenges, and I was neglecting one of my team members, because they were doing well. Nothing was happening there. Didn't have to put any fires out. So I'm focusing over here on all the fires, and I'm neglecting this team member who's doing well, not having any problems. And so she sends me a message and wants to meet with me. And so I go and meet with her, and she literally had a PowerPoint pulled up on the screen.
Nice.
And it just outlines everything I'm doing wrong in not supporting her, and how it's affecting her ability to perform even better, and how it makes her feel. And it just, I had no words. It was one of those moments where, what do you say except for, wow, I'm really sorry. And that's what I said. But even further than that, I reflected on that for the next week, and I've made a commitment to myself that, I'm not going to just focus on the firefighting, but also on my contributing team members that are doing well, making sure that I'm taking care of them and their needs just as much as everybody else. And so that was an instance where I took some personal accountability after it slapped me right in the face with a PowerPoint presentation.
Well, and I will say what you'd experienced is a common problem. I certainly have done that, made that mistake myself, where I focused too heavily on the people who were struggling and the people who were performing well, or exceptional performance was happening. I wasn't being supportive of them. So I think that's a common mistake of managers. The difference is, again, that that you demonstrate that kind of appropriate way we want to act, where we actually take accountability, apologize, and try to change that behavior. Because that's really what, from a leadership and management standpoint, that at the core is what you're trying to instill and cultivate, promote within your team is, look, we're having these goals. You might not hit everything, you might not perform in every way, but if you can learn from these, see these as learning opportunities when you make a mistake or when I'm providing you feedback and improve, that's the ultimate kind of trajectory we want to.
Yeah, it's a learning opportunity. There's some common obstacles to accountability. And I think one of the biggest ones is that fear of failure, right? I think we talked a little bit about fear in a past episode. And so that fear of failure, you don't want to go to your boss and say, hey, we didn't get this done because of XYZ. You just hope that maybe they didn't see it. And or maybe there's a team member that you're protecting and you don't want to shed light on that because you're just, you're trying to figure it out, but in all reality, it's just not working. And so that's a real fear for everyone, I think, is that failure. So that's an obstacle to holding yourself accountable if you're afraid to fail and to have a light shed on your failures, and that somehow that makes you less than important, and you lose your job.
It's called the pratfall effect. Again, throwing out more psychology stuff.
Let's hear it.
But essentially, if you, particularly if you're in a role, in a leadership role, that kind of higher up you are, the more open that you are to sharing and people actually observing and seeing you make mistakes actually makes you more likable. People like you more if you are, especially in a role of authority, if you make mistakes and mess up and you own those mistakes and you say, I'm sorry. People see you, then you're only human, and they can identify with that. And so it's, again, called the pratfall effect. Point is that if you're in a leadership role, it actually is helpful and beneficial to share and identify your mistakes. People will like you more, and they will see that it's not the end of the world if they make a mistake themselves, as long as they're learning from it and growing it and growing from that and moving forward and using that again as an opportunity to improve.
It's so true. As I've mentored people throughout my career, I've always shared stories of like someone that made a mistake, owned up to it immediately, talked about why and the struggles, that caused that mistake, versus someone that hides, cover-ups, denies. The mistake was made. Okay, so either you own it, you take responsibility, you hold yourself accountable, and you ask for help and feedback, or the alternative is you cover it up, you deny it, you point blame, and it's very clear as a leader. You can, it's very distinguished between the two, and going back to that loss of trust, you immediately lose their trust. Yeah. And so whether you're a leader or just an individual contributor, the best thing you can do to hold yourself accountable is to take responsibility. When you make a mistake, own it and ask for feedback and move on. And your boss is going to respect you for that. And they're going to be they're in your corner. Like you just mentioned, it's like, now they're rooting for you. They have a lot more empathy, and now they want to go above and beyond to help you succeed.
Absolutely. I mean, and the reality is you can fret over it however much you want or feel bad about it. You can't change the past. You can only move forward. You're in the present, and you can only do what you need to do to improve the future. So there's no point in sitting there dwelling on the past, because you can't change it.
Yeah. Well, before we recap these final points, any other thoughts on accountability, Ian?
So I will say too, you would mention something, and it came back to mind what it was when you're talking about in a previous conversation I think this was where we were talking about difficult conversations or something like that, maybe. And the fundamental attribution error is when you basically, like, if I'm speeding, it means I need to get somewhere. If I'm driving fast, I'm doing it. I have a purpose. I have a reason. When somebody else is speeding or driving fast, it's because they're a jerk and they don't care about people, that kind of thing. So it's called a fundamental attribution error. It just came to my mind.
Yes, that's what it is.
So it's a little bit different than cognitive dissonance. Again, the idea though oftentimes is that we can't. People just, our brain won't allow us to hold these conflicting beliefs, and so we're going to generate some sort of justification or rationalization to that. And so that's why you oftentimes see, people not be accountable. I know we talked about this again, but as far as recaps go, I think, you definitely hit on some great points as far as personal accountability. If somebody as a leader is asking, okay, but how do I get my team to be accountable? I would encourage you first to make sure that you're looking at your systems that are in place. Do you have a system to make sure that they know what's expected of them, and you're evaluating that routinely, and you're providing that feedback routinely about their performance within that? So this is where I expect you to be, this is where you are, or maybe this is where you are, or whatever it may be. But if you're down below, how do we get you there? And if then they're not reaching those goals, eventually it's up to you as a leader to be accountable, to hold this other person accountable, right? This employee accountable. So that would be my suggestion in terms of how do you create accountability within a workplace.
Yeah, I really like that. And on a personal side, for personal accountability, try to remove that fear of failure.
Yeah.
You have to fail forward, right?
Absolutely.
And your colleagues, your boss, your mentors, they're all going to be rooting for your success if you are holding yourself accountable, right? Whether you're succeeding or failing, if you hold yourself accountable, everyone's going to be behind you, celebrating, helping you get to where you need to be. And so, yes, there are some bad bosses out there that may not respond in kind, but that just tell you, again, you take responsibility for that and go, okay, maybe I need to go and work for another company. I want to leave you with a quote from Winston Churchill.
Nice.
The price of greatness is responsibility. And so hold yourself responsible, be responsible for yourself, and hold yourself accountable. So great discussion, Ian. Absolutely. I know we could probably go another 2 hours on this topic.
Yes.
But it's something that we all have to do for ourselves. We have to hold ourselves accountable for our own performance, and if you're in a leadership position, for your teams. And
well, thanks to Mark and Cassandra and Liz and Reed for participating in the comments there, and anybody else. I appreciate everybody participating and listening in.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to episode 6 of the Staffing Playbook podcast. We'll see you next Friday, and we'll end with this really hilarious and fun video. Here we go.
6 months ago, I get a call from Steve Farrell, who wants to talk about partnering with Yes for our labor needs. It would
change your approach to staffing.
Change my approach to staffing?
We're short on employees. Again. So we're going to have to shut down a line. Sorry.
I told him I've already used multiple agencies and have had headaches with each one. So my approach to staffing is just fine.
With multiple agencies, we thought we had our staffing needs covered.
I had negotiated a super low rate to save on labor costs.
And I could pursue my passions outside of work because I never had to stay overtime due to turnover, productivity, or training issues.
The agency sent quality people. Well, they sent people. Sometimes.
My love of language and lexicon languished.
I negotiated a super low rate.
Hey, the agency employees didn't show up, so we're short on staff again. Sorry.
Dang it. Bupkis. Curses. Fetch.
Hey, an agency sent an employee.
Do you have production experience?
I've produced YouTube videos. I'm hungry. When's my first break?
This is not sustainable. If you want happy customers and a healthy business, something's got to change. So yes, we tried Yes.
Yes focuses on finding the right people for the right job.
Turnover is down, productivity is up.
Yes trains
or onboards
quality employees, ensuring they have the skills
or proper work ethic.
our company needs to succeed.
Thrive.
Yes provides us with quality data so we don't have to juggle multiple agencies to fill our needs.
They could have doubled our rates.
No, they could not have.
Okay, maybe not doubled, but Yes's cost was cheaper in the end. They solved our problems, which were way more expensive than a few points on rate.
I'm just happy that Yes provides us with good people.
Great employees to fill our workflow gaps.
And Yes brings them fast.
Yes specializes in production, warehouse, manufacturing.
And I love that Yes focuses on workplace safety.
Yes also offers services like time clock and
Payroll services, forklift drivers, pickers, packers, general labor.
I like how Yes customizes their screenings to our needs.
I love that we've hired many Yes employees as
Short-term, direct hire, seasonal work, part-time, full-time,
and long-term members of our company.
I love partnering with Yes. No more gaps in production, and I can focus on efficiency without stressing about costs or people. Yes really has
revolutionized.
changed our approach to staffing. Our people are happy.
Your customers are happy.
And that makes me
Delirious.
happy.
Delighted.
Happy.
Thrilled.
Happy.
Cheerful. Gratified. Ecstatic.
Happy. He said happy.
Sunny. Jovial. Tickled. Pleased.
Happy.